Welcome to the Plant-Free MD podcast with Dr. Anthony Chaffee, where we discuss diet and nutrition and how this affects health and chronic disease, and show you how you can use this to optimize your health and happiness, both mentally and physically. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. All right, everybody, it's Dr. Anthony Chaffee here. Today, I have a special guest, Brian Sanders, who is the maker of the very anticipated movie Food Lies, which is hopefully coming out in the next year. And here to talk about that and all of his experience researching that film and his life as well. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. Yes, good to be here. Trade episodes with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was on your show last week, and I'm glad we were able to schedule this. I really appreciate it. For people that don't know your work and what you're doing, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I started as a mechanical engineer. It wasn't the normal path, but I think that helped me not get indoctrinated by the medical system, some would say. Most of my doctor friends kind of say it was almost a hindrance to go through medical training. It's a hindrance in the nutrition aspect, right? They learned all these great skills to do procedures and maybe prescribe medications, but not for preventive healthcare. So I know you're on your own path as well. So I had to kind of do it myself. And it started with my experience with my family. And I always tell this story of like when I turned 30, you just can't eat whatever you want anymore. You're just kind of, things catch up to you. Like I was eating this food pyramid diet, essentially. But I was just getting a dad bod. Yeah. Even though I was playing sports, I was out there playing sports multiple times per week. My whole life, I still do. I still am out there playing beach volleyball, basketball, football, whatever. It catches up to you. You can't outrun the bad diet, as they say. And that was at the same time that I lost both my parents, which was crazy. So I was around 30, lost both of my parents to these modern chronic diseases, right? And then looking back, I see that they just had undiagnosed prediabetes, and then it was from Alzheimer's and cancer, right? So these are just modern lifestyle diseases that we think are normal in the US and Western countries, or anywhere in the world now. All these modern diseases are catching up to people. So I was just kind of really taken aback. Obviously, I didn't want to fall the same fate as them. And I took a look at nutrition and my diet and lifestyle, and I just realized it was all wrong. Like all those standard recommendations were wrong. We were eating the food pyramid. As I said, we were not eating out. It was a big treat to go to a restaurant or to go to fast food like once in a while. My parents were like frugal. They're like, we're going to cook at home. We were doing the lean chicken breast, the broccoli, the pasta, the whole wheat bread. We're doing it all. We were very good, I'm telling you. And they just got sicker each year. And so that sent me on my path. And I eventually started making this film, Food Lies, about 5.5 years ago. And have been around the world and talked to many, many experts and trying to put it all together.
Yeah, well, it's something that I think everyone in this space has been really anticipating. Because you see sort of like teasers and snippets and things like that of your work, and like you're interviewing this person, going to this place, and it's like, man, it looks cool, and it also we really need this sort of thing. We have to get the well-made documentaries out on mainstream platforms showing just what a lump of bull this all was, and the the story behind it, and the history going back, and then speaking to people who actually say, well, no, actually, like that's the common conception of what's going on is actually completely false and a misconception. So tell us a bit about the movie. You've been working on this for 5.5 years. It's a very involved project. So obviously, you've got a ton of material on this. Are you sort of at that point where you have so much material you don't even know what you're going to keep in and what you're going to have to cut at this point?
It's a long process. It's been rewritten probably 5 times. It's good that it took this long, because if I put out something, say 4 years ago, I don't think it would have been very good. I don't think it would have, maybe it would have gone to Amazon Prime and, a few 100,000 people might have seen it, and then it would have disappeared, I think. Like, it takes this long to refine a message, to learn more, to, interview new people. New people pop up along the way, right? And my ideas changed along the way. And so, yeah, it's been really good that it's taken this long. It's helped it get to the next level. I've gotten people involved that are bringing it to the next level. And you're absolutely right. It needs to be like, to get it to the masses, you have to have an A or A plus, right? If you just have like a B plus, it's not going to go anywhere. And I've seen many films. I've watched all the films out there, and there's some decent films that cover some of these topics, right? There's a whole number of them that are just kind of low budget, and they didn't really go anywhere. And I'm like, I can't just make another lower budget film that people didn't see. And these are, I'm not talking about Sacred Cow, because that's actually like a high budget, nicer film, but that still didn't really take off. It didn't get to Netflix, right?
Mm.
Like, Diana Rogers and Rob Wolf were on Joe Rogan's podcast talking about it. This is Sacred Cow. This is a major operation that didn't get on Netflix. They're saying they couldn't get on Netflix for whatever reason. So, yeah, we're trying to go all out. And if anyone wants to see what we're talking about, go to the Food Lies YouTube channel and watch the intro. It's 3.5 minutes. We put it together from scratch, handmade, almost every shot. And this is the level of detail we're going into. And to the question about the footage, yeah, I mean, we had to reshoot a lot of footage. Even when my new director, editor stepped in, he looked at the old footage, like, now let's redo it. Let's get it better. So we're still kind of getting a last few people, and we're gonna, get like the highest quality, best interviews. If we have to redo it, we'll redo it. Like, we're flying to people just to get, this one interview with this one amazing doctor or paleoanthropologist, and we're just gonna do it, and it's gonna be that good.
Awesome. Yeah, you were saying when we were chatting at KetoCon this year that you flew out to Hawaii to interview my buddy Pran Yuganathan, doctor, gastroenterologist, and hepatologist over in Sydney, who's a great guy and very, very, very knowledgeable, and someone who has sort of seen through got the wool off his eyes and is seeing through this bullshit. And he's a very successful doctor, and he curtailed his own practice and his own ability to make money by going off the mainstream, because procedures pay the bills really in medicine, and he's trying to actually heal people with diet and lifestyle so that they don't need the procedures in the first place, which I think is the only ethical thing to do. If you're going to push something that is incorrect just so that you can make a buck, obviously that's an evil thing to do. And obviously, and so it's great that he had that integrity to look at this and go, nope, this is wrong. It doesn't matter if it costs me, like, it's wrong. We got to do it right. So yeah, so that's great. You're getting to interview all these guys. Can you tell us a bit about the movie and what you're trying to cover and the arguments you're making?
Yeah, we're trying to do the most comprehensive, not only the most comprehensive film, the highest quality film, and let's see if I can make it sound even better. No, we're doing a lot. So that's why it turned into a 6-part series. So we are starting with the evolutionary story, right? And when you came on my show, you did a great job of laying out the, I don't know, 50 reasons, 100 reasons we are made to eat meat. If you get into all the details, it's countless. And we talked about Mickey Bendor's study, and they list all these reasons why we are high-level trophic carnivores. So we are kind of doing that in the film. The first episode, the first half, it's about 15 minutes on every single reason why meat and animal foods were so important to our lives as humans and how we became human. And we go into the stomach acidity, and we go into the stable nitrogen isotopes. We go into the teeth, like why did our, all these things are laid out with amazing graphics to go along with it. So this is what we do every week. We have a standing meeting with our professional graphic artists, and we go over each graphic, right? So there's like 40 graphics that we had to make by hand, that based on studies. That, so first we have to find the studies. First you have to write the scripts, tell the story, edit it together, get all the studies, make the graphics, and perfect them to show all these things. Because to a lay audience, they don't know any of this stuff. They're not out there digging up papers from Mickey Bendor. No one knows who Mickey Bendor is, no one knows what a stable nitrogen isotope is. Like,
Yeah.
we have to do this. We have this avatar that we're making the film for called Joe Cheeto, right? So we just picture this guy, Joe Cheeto, he's in Ohio. He's overweight. He's like, doesn't know anything about his health. He's on the few medications, and he's sitting there eating chips, watching this. And by
Mhm.
the end, he's going to get it. He's going to be like, wait a second, I need to completely make a change. My doctor doesn't know what they're talking about, telling me to eat less meat and to eat whole grains and all that stuff. And that's who we're making this film for. And it's not easy to do that, right? So we have to tell so many stories in such a simple way to explain that. And we have to start with evolution. So then, I mean, we could go through the film. I mean, if you want to stop and talk about each section, but that the story of animal foods throughout our history is where we have to start. And no other film really goes and does that.
Yeah. Well, it's a perfect place to start. Yeah, I didn't know it was actually 6 parts. What are the other five?
Well, they're not perfectly lined up per episode, but yeah, the next part is about where we went wrong. I guess
Hmm.
the next main section is called Where We Went Wrong, which is the agricultural revolution. So then we go through, okay, what happened about 12,000 years ago when we started eating grains? Because I get so much pushback. I'm out here for the past 5.5 years, if not longer, 8, 9 years since I've been changed my diet, talking to people about this and learning what the criticisms are, and they'll say, hey, but we've been eating grains for 12,000 years and it was so beneficial to society. And they have no idea. I'm like, you realize I interviewed like Dr. Bill Schindler, who's like studied this stuff. He's a paleoanthropology professor now, and he's looked at the two skeletal remains of the pre-agricultural society and post-agriculture, and they're completely different. These skeletons are remains of anyone who started eating all these grains. They're shorter, their brains are smaller, they're less robust, they have more disease. You can see like even lesions on the bones of all the disease. So you have to, we have to tell this whole story, right? We have to go through a whole history lesson of, well, what happened back then? What changes? Like, people talk about Egyptians. Egyptians were relied on grains, and they were the first sign of all these diseases. And they had heart disease, and especially like the queen, like Queen Hatshepsut, I think it's how you say her name. She had access to all the richest foods and had tons of like disease. Basically, she had all the modern chronic diseases. So people don't understand that it wasn't all good. I mean, it fed more people, right? Grains allow us to form society and feed more people, but it's like that's when nutrition took a back seat to filling bellies. Like, that's kind of one of our lines in the film. It's just, yeah, we got more calories, but since then we've been on decline as a species.
Yeah. Well, and it's a good point with the Egyptians as well. That's something that a lot of people don't know, is that we've done these stable isotope studies with Egyptian mummies as well. And when we found different pharaohs that had atherosclerosis, the theory was that, well, these were rich, wealthy people that could afford, fatty meat, and so that's why they had cholesterol and heart disease problems. But when you look at the mummies of just the normal people, and they're like, that's just how they were buried back then. There are millions upon millions of these out there. The normal people had it as well. The guys had gynecomastia and pot bellies, and they did the stable isotope examinations on these people, and they found that, oh, actually, no, they were eating the same thing. So the pharaohs and the royalty were eating the same thing as the common people, and they were all getting the same diseases. So that sort of throws that out the window with actual hard evidence. It was a supposition, that, oh, well, I'm sure they were rich and that's why, because they could afford meat, and meat's bad, as everyone knows. But
Mhm.
in fact, it was the opposite. You mentioned the civilizations and cities, and that is something that's been put forward by many brilliant historians in the past. But I can think of few serious examples of where that actually doesn't hold true. That you have to have agriculture in order to have cities and a big civilization. Uh, I think most apt is the Native Americans in North America. Before diseases from Europe came in and sort of wiped out like 95% of the population in North America in the early 1600s, right before the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock. There were estimated about 100 million Native Americans all across the country, and they subsisted on meat. They did like the buffalo drops. Drove herds of buffalo over a cliff, and they would make pemmican out of the meat, and they would live on that for the rest of the year. And when people started moving westward, because you really couldn't expand west when things were so heavily populated, we were in these little colonies, and that's where people stayed because there wasn't any more room to go. Now all of a sudden they're like, okay, where is everybody? And they started exploring off, and it was just it was pretty eerie. Everything was abandoned, but they made it to where is now St. Louis, and there was actually a city there. There were houses and long houses and permanent constructions there that were estimated to be able to house 1 million people full-time residents. So I mean that's the capacity of ancient Rome, 1 million people, or a modern
Mhm.
city now, and these were pure carnivores. And the other example would be Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde, the largest contiguous empire that has ever existed, and they were carnivores. They ate horse meat, drank horse blood, fermented horse milk as well. They
Mhm.
they ruled all of Asia and most of Asia and most of Europe. Massive, massive thing. So the only empire that's ever eclipsed them for land mass would be the British Empire, but that was a naval empire. They had spots all over the world. This was one big chunk that they managed, and it was all in carnivore. And so they had cities. Maybe I don't know how many they built on their own, but they sure sacked them and took them over and then ruled them.
Mhm.
And they were carnivores. So I don't even know if that argument is true. It obviously gave some sort of advantage, or probably wouldn't have happened, but at the same time gave a lot of disadvantages. And we can certainly see examples where people actually were able to set up cities and establish large countries just on carnivore. So it can be done.
Oh yeah. Well, there's also Göbekli Tepe, which they now found, and it's 12,000 years old. And yeah, we didn't have agriculture. Assumably, we were just eating. So I mean, we must have been eating animals and whatnot. And that they have this whole amazing site with like large megalithic structures and complex carvings and all that. And oh yeah, I want to go back two quick things, because you're talking about the mummies, and I meant by riches and they could afford the good diets. That usually meant throughout history that they could afford sugar and
Yeah.
like pastry, basically pastries, right? That's the point I was making too, is that they had access to anything. Especially you think about kings, people say, oh, Henry, was it Henry the Eighth? Was he the
Mhm.
fat guy?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, he wasn't like, he was eating, yes, he was eating meat and stuff, but he was also just getting the most expensive items were sugar and pastries and these
Yeah.
high-end delicious foods. So yes, it's definitely blaming it on that. And yeah, so to go through the agricultural revolution, there's also the story that Jessica Thompson, who's a Yale kind of mainstream archaeologist, she did a presentation called Fat of the Land. There's something about how humans ate so much fat back in the day. And really this is a complex story to tell. It's not all about just grains being good for populations. What they're best for is accumulation of wealth. So I think
Mm.
that's part of it, is that it was when we first kind of went from this more egalitarian society to just having pharaohs and all the people that could to gather all the wealth storing the grains. So it wasn't necessarily good for people. It was good for a few people that kind of ruled society. But to get back to Jessica Thompson, she kind of tells a story of there used to be giant megafauna around. And part of the story is why we were kind of forced into agriculture, because we didn't have all these large fatty animals that we had for so long. we had to rely on smaller animals that had less fat. And so we had to make up those calories. So maybe in certain places where we weren't, I don't know, good enough, we didn't develop enough technologies to hunt and get tons of animals. It was just about making up those calories. There's so many things. It's convenient. Also grains. It's once we figured them out, it's kind of just like an easy way to get calories that humans like the taste of, right? It's kind of like just tasty for a lot of people to eat just bread.
Yeah. And yeah, and I mean, I think any farmer is going to balk at saying, like that's an easy life. But, compared to like going out roaming and fighting and killing and risking your life, day in and day out, and, roaming around and, out in the wilderness when you've got lions and bears
Mm-hmm.
and all these sorts of things, staying on one spot and just having your food grow around you, it's not a bad deal. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's not a bad gig at all. That was another thing as well, like of civilizations, that had on carnivore as well. I talk about, I might have mentioned this when we spoke on your podcast, but there's a story I like from Herodotus, the father of history, who chronicled a meeting between an emissary from Persia and Ethiopia. There's a king of Ethiopia, and so the king of Ethiopia asked the guy from Persia, "It's like, okay, what do you guys eat, and how long do your people live?" And the Persian, explained grains and how they make bread, and said that our people will normally live around 70 years. And the king of Ethiopia sort of laughed at him and said, "Well, no wonder you live such short lives if all you eat is dirt. Our people, we only eat boiled meat, and we only drink the milk of our livestock, and we would live 120 years, sometimes more." And so this is a country, this is a nation, and with a city and a king and all that, and they were carnivores, and people think that's far fetched, that they said, "Oh, we'll live 120 years. You're just bragging." Maybe it was, but we actually know as geneticists that we're actually supposed to live that long, and he sort of nailed it on the head. So yeah, that's just another example. But yeah, you're right. A lot throughout history, you generally see people eating plants out of necessity. They don't have enough meat, and so they have to fill that gap, as you say, with grains and rice and then tubers, or whatever the hell they have available. And then spices were to cover up the taste of rotting meat, because they didn't have refrigeration. This was a way to preserve meat and keep it, because it was so important, and people knew that. And so you had to spice these things up. So that's sort of this sort of slow encroachment of plants. But no one really argued that these were better for you. They were arguing that this is a necessity and you need to do this. But we've known since before the Romans, I'm sure, that nightshades will kill you. You don't eat nightshades. And then a few hundred years ago, some bright spot said, "Oh, hey, look, these guys are eating nightshades, but they're eating them this particular way. Let's try it out." But now we forgot about that. We forgot that you blanch the tomato and take off the peel, you remove the seeds, and you only eat vine ripened ones, and that's less toxic. And like there's the folk wisdom that green tomatoes are poisonous. You're like, "Oh, that's just an old wives' tale." It's true, because they have way more toxins in there. I mean, poison to the sense that you eat one green
Mm-hmm.
tomato, you're gonna die. No, but it's bad for you. It's not good. Alcohol is poison. It doesn't kill you in one drink. It takes a while, but it's gonna mess you up before then.
That's a huge point that we try to make in the film. And what I've learned along the way with guys like Dr. Bill Schindler, who I mentioned, he's a paleoanthropologist, he's an experimental archaeologist, but he's also a food scientist. And he
Mm.
travels around the world, and that's his main shtick. He's like, hey, we used to eat all kinds of things that, he knows he's all about eating nose to tail animal foods. He's like, we became human because we started hunting, getting first access to the animal, getting all the fat, getting all the blood, getting the organs, getting everything, all those calories and great sources of fat and protein. But now he's into going around the world and seeing all these complex preparation methods that these people had and that we've lost. So there's a story for every plant food, and he'll tell you of how we've lost the traditional preparation techniques, and now we're getting all those anti-nutrients. Bread is a huge story. It used to be slow fermented sourdough that would get out a lot of these anti-nutrients. No one does that anymore. There's no time. They're out to make money. They do fake sourdough. They just put in a bit of sour flavoring. It's so bogus. If you go to any sourdough in the store, I think it's citric acid. It's some sort of like ingredient that just makes it taste sour. It's not fermented. It's just bogus, just bad bread. There's even with Africa. So I went to Africa for this film a year and a half ago, and we saw the corn story. So now Africa is infiltrated by sacks of cornmeal, basically, just to give them calories, and they have to live on this stuff, and they call it ugali. They make like a paste out of it. You just add water. If you're poor, all you have is water and the cornmeal, and you get this paste, and they have to survive on this stuff. Well, people did use corn in South America, but they would do these complex preparation techniques, and they would nixtamalize it, and they use like lime to get out all of the anti-nutrients, because there's anti-nutrients in corn that block the vitamin. What is it? B1. B1 is thiamine. It blocks some of these other B vitamins, because it has these anti-nutrients in it. So they, some like the Mayans and some of these civilizations figured out how to subsist on these sort of low quality foods with the proper preparation techniques. But then that stopped, and now people around the world aren't doing that. And especially in Africa, they're just surviving on these bags of just food that's like slowly killing them. That's another thing, is we didn't just decide. It's not like we figured everything out, that we knew that if we made this switch into the fallback foods, into these plant foods, that it was going to harm us, because it's like you said, it's a slow poison. So it was kind of just this long experiment. And then some people did figure out that, this guy's not thriving, or like this woman couldn't have kids and she was eating, all this stuff. But just on a mass level, we really didn't learn our lesson.
Yeah, like that's the funny thing too, is that they had all these fermentation techniques and the actual fermented sourdough, and it was still bad, and we still see in fossil record how it rotted teeth and stunted growth, and now we're not even doing it. It's not even that good, so now it's like
Yeah, that's a
really
good
bad.
point.
Yeah, and like another one is like cassava. Cassava root's like the third most important calorie source in the third world, and it will just kill you if you don't prepare it right, because it has like a ton of cyanide. There's two different kinds of cassava. There's one that will just kill you on the spot, and the other one will just make you very sick. But they're both bad, and you eat enough of the less poisonous one will still kill you. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, you have to prepare these things. And this is something that's been traditionally known for a very, very long time. And now people are just denying the existence of that entire field of science called botany. And it's like, I'm sorry, no, this is established fact. There's tens of thousands of toxins in there. They're cataloged and named and cataloged, and they're in books. You can just read them, and people, when they're saying like, oh, meat's so bad for you, it's just like, look, there are books containing thousands upon thousands of poisons, of known poisons in plants, of the plants we eat specifically. Name one toxin in meat, just one. They'll start with cholesterol, but obviously cholesterol, that's a bogus argument. They have nothing else. They have this epidemiological study showed a slight increase in this, and it's just like, oh, shut up. Name one chemical in meat that is toxic. And show the evidence of why it's toxic. But
That's it. And it's a hard pill to swallow, though. Like, we're talking about all this stuff, we know it. People listening probably are tuned into a lot, but try to tell this to a mass audience, right? Because they're just used to saying plants are magical, that the more plants you eat, the healthier you are. And I try to shake up people's heads, because again, I talk to everyone about it. I'm in an Uber, I'm talking to the person. I'm in the airplane, talking to the person next to me. I get all the stories, all the dumb responses, all that, right? And it's so hard to get through, because we're fighting back against, I don't know, like 70 years of just terrible science and just wrong information. And so, man, you got to do it very carefully to try to let people in on this. Like, hey, there are anti-nutrients in plants, and that like plants were fallback foods. Basically yes, we had to eat them sometimes, but it's not like, it's not like it's going to kill you, like you said. And also in a small amount, if you have plants, I'm like 85% animal foods. Like, I mean, maybe I will be better if I just go 100%. You were kind of convincing me on our show last week, but I'm of the thought that, hey, if we get all of this good nutrition from animal foods and we prepare some of these certain low anti-nutrient plant foods, that we can be okay. And I think that's what people did, is they kind of knew that. They're like, yes, animal foods are our number one source of nutrition, and they just knew that inherently. And Weston Price is a great, I love him. He went around the world 100 years ago and found all this stuff out. So he this is where I kind of left off with the where we went wrong story, the agriculture story. To jump back in, it's kind of coming together here. He went around the world 100 years ago, and he kind of proved all the stuff that we're talking about just from this observation of the world's healthiest people. He went to the tribes, or not tribes, he went to the native living people that didn't live in the modern ways. There's a few, this was in the 1930s, there's a few people that still lived on their ancestral diets. And he went to Australia, he went to Micronesia, he went to the Swiss Alps, he went to Africa, he went everywhere. And these people all had the same traditions, especially around pregnancy, because they knew, this is what I'm saying, humans are smart. We didn't have, airplanes. Like we were smart in different ways. We had to figure out how to survive, how to grow a healthy baby, how to, produce healthy offspring. And they all were eating animal foods, and they were eating raw milk and fat and eggs and liver and organ meats and anything, just any animal food, seafood, even whatever they had available from that part of the world where he went, they were eating animal foods with the most nutrient dense source of all the vitamins and minerals and protein. And yeah, I mean, it just proves that how important they were and how humans could figure this stuff out. But I guess to my other side, Weston Price also did observe them eating the plant foods, but they would go through great lengths to prepare them properly so that they could extract the most nutrition out of them, and it just didn't kill them. So then you'd kind of get to, okay, well, is it thrive or survive? From there, like maybe they would have been even better if they didn't try to prepare these certain plant foods.
Yeah. And that's the funny thing too, is that, there's people like Weston Price and J.H. Salisbury and Stefansson and a ton of others, and Vogelin, wrote a book called The Stone Age Diet in 1975. He was a gastroenterologist arguing for a carnivore diet to treat modern diseases. All the way up as far as 1975. And then, 1977, the USDA says that cholesterol causes heart disease. And 100 years of scientific literature, medical journals, and books, and well-researched books, are just thrown out the window, just completely thrown out the window. And just no one even knows about these things anymore. I was never taught about these things. I had to find these things out on my own. I had to sort of look around and scour, and I found that, there's so much, bull out there that, I was like, okay, well, what else did we know? And I started like looking through like old, JAMA articles from like the 1950s, and they were just going nuts on cholesterol, like, saying this is a bullshit idea. This is based on bad science. There's like hardly any evidence. And he's like, these studies that they hang their hat on, they're crap, and here's why. And this was a hotly debated subject, because it was, it went counter to thousands of years of actual medical literature, not just folklore and hokum, but actual documented by scientists and doctors, and people can get things wrong, of course, but there's plenty of examples of that. But you have to sort of think about that. I mean, there's this weight behind tradition, that, I mean, some people just think, traditions are antiquated, and maybe some of them are, but traditions arise, usually based on need, and they're carried on. They stand the test of time, as it were. It's like, hey, this works for people, and this provides an advantage. And so, you should think about that. We've only been doing this whole low fat, high carb and
Mhm.
sugar crap for 40 years. And it's just destroyed us, you
Mhm.
know? Whereas like we did the opposite before that for thousands of years. And that was, people were saying, hey, this works, this works. So, I think I think that's pretty telling as well.
It is that's a good story. Well, for one, a quick aside with the tradition, even I use a CGM. These companies will send me a CGM, continuous glucose monitor. I kind of figured out there's a tradition for a reason. If you eat like some like vinegar, apple cider vinegar, like a salad, you eat a meal of protein and fat, and then you have a dessert. That's sort of the standard thing that people did. It's like this is the order you eat, and this is that actually helps you lower your blood sugar. It's like eating the apple cider vinegar or beforehand, eating the protein and fat before you eat, say, a carb or sugar. And it's just interesting that even though we did, just eat all these things, we figured out how to eat them in a healthier way. So that's just interesting how humans work and how we have these traditions. And uh, back to the 50s. So we kind of did just transition into the next part of the film, which is all the bad science that's been done. And people don't know this, that it wasn't like a slam dunk with the cholesterol thing.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because people just think, oh, okay, yeah, we did this happen. Then we got Ansel Keys came in, and well, that's part of the story actually. Is Ansel Keys came in and then did the spurious correlations and showed 7 country study and basically threw out all the other countries that didn't match because there was 22 countries and saturated fat did not correlate with heart disease in a meaningful way at all. And there's that whole story, but people don't know how debated this was because for all of history, we knew that animal foods were healthy. And then you do have this crazy, was a McGovern committee, right? That I don't want to get into this whole story, but there's the Eisenhower had a heart attack, and
Mhm.
they were like, what's going on with all his heart disease? It was the same time everyone's smoking in elevators, people are smoking in their car. There's like, we're getting all these vegetable oils and Crisco that are coming into our diet in a huge way. Processed foods are coming into our diet in a huge way, and people wonder why. Oh, they're also just drinking. Think of Mad Men. You're like, Mad Men was like, I guess a decade later, but this is what's going on. They're drinking at lunch, they're smoking every 2 seconds, and we wonder why heart disease was becoming, a big problem. So anyway, they go to this crazy committee. We tell this story in detail. They even have a guy, Nick Modern, who was a vegetarian. He was like an intern or something. He was this random kind of intern guy that was a vegetarian. They had him write up this whole uh, bill, basically, to not bill, but just report to show to try to show that meat was harmful and uh, basically throw out thousands of years of just knowledge that meat was healthy. So there was another guy, John Yudkin, who
Yeah.
was against Ansel Keys, right? And he looked around the world, and what he was a British guy. So what he saw is whenever this British Empire came in, they would bring in sugar, flour, and oil, right? These are the three like cheapest, most shelf stable, most processed foods. This is also what Weston Price saw is whenever these three ingredients came in, the health declined. And so Yudkin was like, hey, this is when we get heart disease. When these cultures start eating these three ingredients, this basically displaces so many good calories, so much good nutrition with this empty calories and eat what even does harm to you metabolically. And yeah, basically Ansel Keys won.
Yeah.
You could say like if there was more behind it, or if there was some sort of forces that wanted him to win in a sense, and like why did we have this idea? And you can get into all kinds of other stuff, into the way things are pushed and in the medical system and that kind of thing. But man, it was not just like a simple scientific thing, and now it's great that we're kind of going back on all that science and debunking it.
Yeah. It's funny too, because people don't think about that either. That Eisenhower story, there were headlines in newspapers saying, "What is this new heart disease?" We'd
Mhm.
all been eating meat and smoking and drinking. I mean, like you said, people were smoking a lot. They were smoking a lot more. They were drinking a lot more. You think like the 20s, the roaring 20s, is everyone smoked, everyone drank. 1800s, even, I mean, this was just a normal thing. I mean, smoking was so prevalent that in America, tobacco was used as currency for a time. And
Mm-hmm.
so, this was a very regular thing. We did not have the heart disease that we have now, and we had the smoking. And obviously, smoking does contribute,
Mm-hmm.
well, the evidence is very strong in
Mm-hmm.
that regard. There's something like a 3,000% increased correlation between smoking and heart disease. But we don't actually have causative studies. It's just this very, very strong correlation. So you're 30 times more likely to develop heart
Mm-hmm.
disease if you smoke. And so that's a pretty damn strong correlation. But it's still not causation. But it's likely that there are causative mechanisms there. And yet, when people were eating more naturally, they weren't getting as much
Yeah.
heart disease.
It's so amazing how like what changed the most. This is so the meat didn't change the most.
Hmm.
Smoking and drinking did start coming up a lot, but disease didn't follow immediately because you could
Hmm.
still be protected if you're eating a good diet and people were all thin and healthy. And what really changed the most was these just influx of processed foods, and it's the sugar, flour, and the oil. Like that's what changed the most. And it's so easy to know that that's the only thing that really changed when this disease started to come about. We actually have eaten less meat since then,
Yeah.
right? I've looked up all this stuff, and people probably know this who are listening that we did do what the nutrition guidelines said, especially since 1980. Well, it's like meat and fat and milk and eggs consumption have all gone down. Chicken, I should have said red meat. Red meat consumption has gone down. Chicken, which they told us was supposed to be good for us, went up. Whole grains went up. All these things went up. We did do what we were told, and we've gotten worse. And I'm just telling you, if you look, you can do all the science and understand why this is true and that why meat is healthy. All that. That's great. I know there's all this science out there, but you can just look from the highest level and just think, okay, what changed? And it really is these three ingredients that just took over our diet. And that's, I mean, I don't see how it can be something else.
Yeah, well, and I totally agree with you. That's something that I think is probably one of the more damning pieces of evidence, is the fact that we listened to their stupid advice, and the health of the world changed. I mean, in after the 1980, in America, we reduced our cholesterol and fat intake by 30%, reduced red meat by around 33%, and increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, and grains and sugar as well. And what were the results? The obesity rate tripled, heart disease tripled, stroke rate tripled, cancer rate tripled, type 2 diabetes increased by sixfold, autoimmune diseases went sky high, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism. These things all went up exponentially. They almost didn't exist before then. Now they're the only things we treat. And they all increased at the exact same time, right? And just focusing on heart disease, if we're saying that increased cholesterol causes heart disease, well, then a reduction in cholesterol will necessarily show a reduction in heart disease, but it tripled.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you can't say that A causes B if you reduce A and B triples. If anything, you can say that A is protective against B. And in fact, it is. All the studies, massive studies with hundreds of thousands of people collectively. Usually after 2015, there's just a ton of them that came out. In 2015, a ton of them came out as well, showing that not only is there no correlation even between cholesterol, saturated fat, and heart disease, but they found an inverse correlation between these phenomena. So the more cholesterol you had, the more saturated fat you were eating, the less heart disease you had, the less strokes you had.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's, you can't prove causation with correlation, but if you show that there's no causation, that proves there is no correlation. And that is actually what the data shows on the cholesterol thing.
I try to explain that to people, and I also try to do it in the film. Is that the worst thing is a reverse correlation? Like, so that's basically what you're saying. To recap, it's if your idea is that this is causing something and that goes down, that
Mhm.
does a lot more to disprove that that was the problem, right? So it's hard because causation never equals correlation. I mean, it doesn't necessarily equal correlation, right? You can show two things. We can't know that correlation is causation, but what you can know is the opposite. Is
Yeah.
it goes a long way to disprove your ideas. So that's definitely what happened. And there's so many good new studies coming out each year. Another reason why I'm glad the film is kind of taking a while. There was the 5 studies in the Annals of Internal Medicine completely exonerating red meat. That just said there's no evidence to show that red meat is harmful. There's just new studies every few months that come out that are helping to support all the stuff we're talking about.
Yeah. There was just one that came out with Ben Bickman and oh gosh, who else was it? Oh, and Paul Mason, Dr. Paul Mason out of Sydney, who I really like. I haven't met the guy, but I really like his videos. Very interesting dude. And I've spoken to Professor Bickman as well, also a very interesting dude. And there was with a third gentleman who I forget the name at the moment, but they published a study recently, or more of a paper making an argument with supporting evidence that if you're on a ketogenic diet, at least, that you don't need statins and you don't need cholesterol control, and they showed the evidence for that and all the different studies showing this as well, and they're just making that case. And so these are being published by major professors at major universities, and well-established doctors and clinicians and scientists, and being published in top peer-reviewed journals. And so I'm really excited for how things are coming along. I was looking at this sort of 5 years ago, and no one was talking about this stuff. I mean, there's a couple people, and but really not all that many. Baker, I think, was the loudest voice. And but I just see it, I was like the truth will out. I mean, this is just, there's so much evidence here. It's just people don't know about it. And so like this will get out there. And I was thinking like this is going to start hitting mainstream sort of in the next a couple of years ago. I thought probably in the next 5 years this was going to be mainstream, and I think that's definitely keeping that on track.
The problem is you kind of see this, the opposite agenda is reaching all-time highs though. So it's like, as this evidence is getting out, there is a small contingency of people that are just good scientists that are saying, hey, we were wrong. And then what they do is they put twice the effort into pushing plant-based meat, into the climate change, they're trying to get people to eat less meat because of the climate. They're pulling out all the stops, right? They have the playbook of like, okay, if we can't do it for health reasons, we'll do it for climate reasons. If we can't do it for climate reasons, they'll resort to ethical reasons, or they'll just package all three together, which is what vegans do. And yeah, I mean, I hope this film gets out on Netflix. People are telling me, hey, maybe Netflix is too woke to put your film up there because we're going against all these narratives. But you know what I did hear very recently is they have a new CEO or something, some new person in charge at Netflix that's saying, if you are biased and you have these kind of woke ideas, I don't want to categorize them all as woke. I don't know if that kind of makes sense. If you have these ideas that you're trying to, suppress information, and that you have this sort of ideology around things, you can leave. Like, we are not here for you, show you the door, and we're not doing that here anymore. So that's amazing news.
All right. Well, I might keep my Netflix subscription then. Yeah, that's the case.
Yeah, some of the content, it's like, oh man, I can't handle this. Like, I've turned so many things off, even just the mainstream movies, and they're just pushing a narrative, and you're like, this is so obvious.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do this. I just turn it off.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like a lot of these things, like they're not necessary to the plot. Game of Thrones did that. It's just like, I've read the books. There were not as many dongs in that book as they try to put in this movie. And it's just like, why is it that every now we're painting this picture, we're doing this scene, and all of a sudden there's just some dude with his stuff hanging out, just walking across, and it's just like a close up on his ass. I'm like, I don't need to see that. I'm sorry, I don't need to see that. I just never in my life would even if that was something that I'd be interested in. Like, this does not add to the story. It would be, I've seen movies where that was actually part of the plot and that actually
Mhm.
played into it,
Makes
I
sense.
didn't mind
Yeah.
at all. I didn't care. I was
Yeah.
just like, this is gratuitous, you know?
Yeah.
And that's sort of the problem I have with this stuff is it's gratuitous. You know, they're trying to push something and it's, you know, it's not necessary to push it. Like who are you fighting? Like no one's I have not heard people say that just like gay people, like no one
Mhm.
cares. No one
No
cares
one cares.
anymore. You know, it's just like, you know, but they I think they just want to keep fighting now that they know there's no one to fight against.
There's so much of, even like they're trying to normalize things like even Westworld. You know, Westworld's a
Yeah.
big mainstream show. This new season, I'm trying to watch it. They just have people in masks on in the background. I'm like, why are these people in masks? Like it has nothing to do with anything. And just like every like 10th person has like a black mask on and they're just walking around outside with a mask on.
They're
Like
robots. Robots aren't going to get
uh,
viruses. You know?
it's just so wild how okay. We got to get off this topic. Back to nutrition, back to food. Oh man, no, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. It's just super annoying. But the, okay, here's a topic I was thinking about last night. It's kind of it goes into all the stuff we're talking about. The biggest problem, what I see happening with older people. So older people follow all this advice. And these are the people I'm talking to. I was in LA this weekend talking to older parents, my friend's parents, get third stent in his heart.
Right.
Just not listening, you know, doesn't want to change. They're set in their ways. They believe that oatmeal is healthy. They believe you have to eat the more fruits and vegetables they eat, the healthier they get. They have all these things. What does that do to people? It basically replaces muscle with fat. So this sarcopenic obesity, right? So this means you have low muscle mass and high fat mass. You don't even have to look obese and you can have sarcopenic obesity. Really, this is another thing we're trying to bring up in the film is that you can look normal, quote normal, which is changing, right? They're normalizing dad bods now. So you can look like, okay, well, this guy looks like an average, like 60-year-old and he has like a 34-inch waist. So he's like got super skinny arms and legs. His belly's like protruding, but he just looks normal. But it's like if you put him in a DEXA scan, you would see that all his muscle is turning into fat. So this is just okay. This is gonna come around. This is what is going on. Every single old person I've ever seen is melting away. Their muscle is melting and it's being replaced by fat, and they look kind of normal. And this is the opposite of what people look like in Africa and what old people who are healthy look like. In our modern world, you don't have to use your muscles at all. You have the wrong information and you keep just eating the wrong foods, which inherently just does this to your body, right? If you're eating this low amount of protein and nutrients and you're getting a high amount of fats or carbs or whatever, any type of energy, this is what your body turns into, right? If you just feed it the wrong, basically, ratio of nutrients to energy, which is protein would be included in those nutrients. And you're not demanding anything from your body, right? So people wonder, oh, well, the blue zones, these people supposedly live long, or these people in Africa, they're still healthy. I was hanging out with a lady who's 105. She was dancing around, jumping up and down, 105. She's out there using her muscles, you know, and I just want to try to get this across to people in the Western worlds that it's how big a problem this is. Like that is metabolic mayhem. And Bickman actually does talk a lot about this. To mention Bickman again, you know, he's out there on social media talking about this stuff. Dr. Ted Naiman, all these people are just pointing this out, but it's not getting to the masses. And I just see it, and it's so sad to see these people wither away. And have you heard of Dr. Sean O'Mara? He's on Instagram a bit. He's not like a well-known person. He does these MRI scans of people, and he not only sees their visceral fat. So if you get in the MRI, you can see a cross section. You can see all the visceral fat they have, so they can look like they're normal weight, but they're filled with visceral fat. But he'll also look at their thighs and other muscles, and you can see the difference between an older person who is strong and you can see the muscle mass, and their bone mass is bigger, their muscle mass is bigger. And then you look at someone else who's eating the wrong foods and more sedentary, and their muscle is not even there. It's just pure fat. It's amazing to see this. So I guess the point is, especially in Hawaii. So I'm from Hawaii. I see all these older people walking around. They look thin. They look fine. But if you take their shirt off, and there's a lot of beaches in Hawaii, you can see these guys, men, women, they emaciated, low muscle mass, sarcopenia, basically, fat, visceral fat, belly fat. They have like the little pooch, right? There's a million Asian dudes with a pooch belly, skinny arms and legs. And then we're like, hey, why are they getting sick? These guys are like eating low cholesterol diet. He's eating all the right things. Why is he having a stroke? Why does he have heart disease? Why is Alzheimer's, dementia? This is the problem. If you have low muscle mass and a high visceral fat, you can look normal and have all these diseases. India and China, they do have the most people in the world, but they also have the most type 2 diabetes in the world. They're leading the way in type 2 diabetes at pretty low body weights, right? And it's just like people can't figure it out. The mainstream can't figure it out. This is why I think there is this fat acceptance movement, or all this bogus stuff in the mainstream that makes no sense. It's because, or they're saying, oh, diets don't work. Look at these people. They're skinny, yet they're still getting disease. Like, they're not skinny. They're sarcopenic. They have sarcopenic obesity, basically. You can have all these problems and look semi-normal. So that's my rant. I'm sure you agree with this.
100%. And it's a good rant, and it's a very good point. On that note, you're saying that you went to Africa and you saw these people living traditionally and how they lived. You're saying that you visited like the Maasai and the Hadza and even like the Pygmies, which I didn't even know they still had Pygmies around. That's pretty cool. Like, how was that trip? What did you see?
Oh, wow. So much. Yeah, the Pygmies and they're in Uganda. So they're being pushed out of their forest. So it's the craziest story. This is how human society works. Governments just control people and ruin people's lives and push them out and try to make money. And this is the same story in Tanzania as Uganda, as the rest of the world. In Uganda, the Pygmies are pushed out of the forest so that the government can make money off the mountain gorillas, right? So it costs like $800 to see the mountain gorillas. And they push the Pygmies out of the forest where they lived traditionally, so that they could sell $800 packages to the mountain gorillas. Same in Tanzania, they have all the animals in the game reserves, right? You have the Ngorongoro crater. It's amazing. It's so many animals. It's like the Lion King, where it's just a million animals and everyone's living together. And the Hadza, they have to hunt like little bush babies. There's no more animals left for them to hunt. They're being pushed off their land. They have no good land to hunt on. And people wonder, then you have guys like Herman Ponzer, who studies the Hadza, writing all these papers about how they eat so many plant foods and they eat such a high fiber diet. Like, for one, they're not. And I'll tell you what. And two, they have nothing left to eat. So of course they're going to have to gnaw some tubers to try to get a few calories. And they're, grabbing like a few leaves and berries if they can find them. What they want is animals. What they've always hunted is these giant animals. This even goes back to the Jessica Thompson stuff. We used to have gigantic fatty animals, megafauna. We had sloths that were like 40 feet tall. We had giant, people know mastodons, woolly mammoth, all this stuff gone. Then we went down to smaller animals. Now the Hadza are at the third stage, where they almost have no animals, and they have like a little bush baby, which is the size of like a softball, basically. And they're out there trying to eat those things. And we got two of them when we were out. Like, one day we went hunting, they got two little bush babies. The other day they got this tiny little tick, like a little deer thing that was, the size of 2 footballs. And then one day they got a gorilla, or not a gorilla, orangutan.
Say, oh, okay.
Or yeah. So basically they're eating primates, which is not good.
Pretty gnarly. Yeah.
I chose not to eat the primate meat.
Yeah.
But I did eat the tick, and I did eat some of that liver and the brain of that little tick. But
Yeah.
okay, but you see the trend here. These people are pushed off their land. This has happened. American Indians, everywhere around the world, this happens, and their nutrition suffers greatly, and their health completely declines very quickly. And so the Pygmies, same thing. The lady who was 105, she said she grew up in the forest eating meat 3 times a day. We had a great translator that kind of grew up in the area. She said I would be able to eat meat 3 times a day. We would capture pigs in the forest. They had little traps. They showed us how to make. She said now we get meat twice a year on Christmas and Easter. It's the only time they can afford meat. It's so sad. They're out there on this tiny little strip of land. Some of these kids, their like job was to break rocks into smaller rocks. That was like what they were doing on the side of the road to like, I guess, make gravel.
Wow.
Like it was crazy. There was a kid eating a corn stalk, not a piece of corn, not a corn cob. He was eating the stalk because that's all they had was just, he was just chopping the stalk and like sucking on the stalk. Same thing, back to the Hadza. Yeah, the Hadza were eating some tubers. They weren't eating the fiber. Since yes, the women do stay home and while the men go hunt, and they were baking tubers and they would gnaw on these tubers and then they would spit out the fiber. And I was given some, and for one, it's covered in dirt and everything's dirty. It's like they have a great microbiome over there
Yeah.
because you're just eating whatever, you're just doing it. So I think that's why they have, people like the Herman Poncer type crowd from Harvard like to say how the fiber is why they have such good microbiome. Like, I don't think so. I think they gave me a piece of liver that was on a knife that was never been washed once. Obviously, they're not washing their hands. Everything was grubby. There was yellow intestine stuff on it when I ate it. But yeah, these tubers, nothing. It tasted like you're getting like a few, maybe like 2 grams of just glucose out of it, and then it's just pulp, and they just spit out the pulp. It's like they're not actually eating the fiber. They're getting a few grams of glucose to stay alive, and then they spit it out. So yeah, that's some of the story with Africa. They basically, with the Hadza, all they care about is meat. All they care about is getting animals. The men just sit around all day, either cooking meat or talking about their next hunt or going on the next hunt. And the to skip to the Maasai, I don't know if we're running out of time here, but the Maasai are the people that drink blood and milk and eat meat. And so we learned a little bit more about that. We did that with them, which was amazing. It tasted fine. They did it for us. We went in their little pen. They had all their animals. They found like a good one. They rotate the animals. Some people think that this is like harmful or that kills the animal. Not at all. They keep these animals alive. That's part of the point of drinking the milk and blood, is it's a renewable resource. So we did that with them. They hit the artery, it goes into the gourd. They get the milk and the gourd. They mix it around. You drink it. So it's kind of fun because we were there as tourists, but they were there just to get breakfast. You know what I mean? Like, they weren't putting on a show for us. It wasn't like when you go to Hawaii and they do a fake luau. It was like, this was like their breakfast. They were like kind of pushing us out of the way. They're like, all right, my turn. Like, I need to eat so I can like leave for the day. And one little thing we learned is they actually kind of rotate. So they do 3 days of blood and milk, and then they kind of do like 3 days of meat, right? They would slaughter like a goat every so often. So it's like they just have ideas that you're not supposed to mix them for whatever reason. I think, they just sort of basically just go back and forth.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So they go for like the artery in the neck, and then like how do they stop the bleeding at that point?
Yeah, they have a little arrow. It's like mini bow and arrow with a very short tip that just cracks it, and it opens it up and it spurts out, and then they have mud. All it is mud. So they just grab mud from the ground and like mash it into it, and it just stops. And it's good. They figure it out, and the cow's fine. It it heals up, and then they won't come back around to that one until a few weeks later.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. People do that, by the way. They're smearing mud into their open wound.
Yeah.
Might not go too well. But yeah, you see animals in the wild. They get some big gash and they're walking around in muds and swamps and things like that, and their body fights this stuff off. So there's something to be said for your immune system when it actually is functioning properly. I had a thought. You were saying about the Hadza, how they're being driven off their land. They're being forced really to eat very small game when normally they'd get larger game, and they're sort of forced to eat the tubers and things. They also eat like honey and things like that, and this seems to be obviously people like honey. Honey tastes good, but that someone should be a bit of an anomaly in that. Not that people wouldn't eat honey if they had it, but that's something that's been sort of argued that like, oh, well, maybe we should eat honey because the hads eat honey. But from what you're saying, they're not exactly living as they traditionally would. Is that, have you seen something about that? Like, is honey a newer
Mm.
addition now that they're sort of more nutrient
They're
starved?
forced to. I don't know. I think it could be they have to rely on it more, but
Hmm.
because they need calories, but I also don't think any human would turn down honey. But then
Hmm.
it goes back to what we talked about on my show is people do all kinds of things. It doesn't mean it's like the best for longevity. I'm
Yeah.
not saying either way. I would love to know that honey is part of the human diet. Uh, so
I
I'm not
agree.
saying either way, but they did they the men didn't seem to be interested in anything but meat and honey, right? Why wouldn't you? I mean, if you can find honey, it's delicious. Like I get it, and but then again, I don't know. They're not being like, oh man, I want to live to 140. Like I shouldn't eat this honey, or
Yeah.
maybe they could if they didn't eat the honey. I have no idea, but they were there. Yeah, they would find that they would just find it. They would go out on the hunts, and then they're like, oh, that's you know, you could see the baobab, and it had a certain look to it, and you could see where that they were, and they brought an axe with them, and then they could make a fire in like 2 seconds with whatever little method, and they would smoke out the bees, chop open thing, reach in there with their hands, grab the honeycomb, and eat it.
Yeah. Nice. That's yeah. There was something something that Dr. Baker mentioned. I forget the study, but it basically looked at the Hadza, and it appeared if like mostly the men ate the honey because they sort of found it when they were out on a hunt,
Yep.
and then they would just sort of eat it on the spot. They didn't bring it back for like the people in the village, like women and children.
Mhm.
But they found that like the dental decay in the men was actually much more advanced
Mm.
than in the women as well, and so that might be an indication of that difference. So obviously, I mean, sugar is going to rot your teeth, but
Mhm.
there's the argument that in the matrix of honey, somehow fructose does not act as fructose in your body, which I think is needs some backing, like
Mm.
because I don't know why it wouldn't. I'm sure honey's better for you. I mean, it is going to be better for you than table sugar, but that doesn't mean
Mhm.
that fructose stops being fructose, you know?
Mhm.
But yeah, and you're right. I mean, sometimes, people do things because like, they need to, and it's not necessarily, the best thing for them, but that's what they found they need to do. And, in their situation there, they're being sort of, driven out of their traditional
Mhm.
land and ways of hunting and living. So, like, well, good for them. They're doing what they need to do to survive.
Well, and they're the men. They're out there running for 8 hours straight. They're not running
Yeah, yeah,
actually.
true.
They either walk or they sprint. I mean, they're out. Like we had to turn back at a certain point. It was crazy. Like they just kept going, and we're like, all right, we're out. We have no more water too. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, some honey's fine if you're out there on an 8 hour hunt.
Yeah.
Have some honey. Like I don't think that. I think your body can handle that.
Yeah.
And also, think about the women. When we were with the second Hadza group that was like kind of farther away from society even more, there was like a bunch of women. They had the most amazing teeth I've ever seen. There was a girl who maybe was like 15, 17, something, just all like, it was like a tooth model.
Yeah.
This girl lived in a grass hut. Like she actually lived on the dirt in a grass hut. Obviously, no clue what a dentist is. Like complete tooth model. Like no one's teeth are this good in America I've ever seen that weren't fake.
Yeah.
Wide jaw, fully developed, arches and palate. It's amazing.
Yeah. That's awesome. And perfectly in line with what, Weston Price found. The people that were
Yep.
living traditionally, they had perfectly developed teeth and jaws and palates. There was a study from who's like the curator for the dental museum at Harvard back in the 1920s, and he sent this polar explorer up, well, with instructions while he was going up on this sort of mission up north, up to like the whatever big ass bay up there, and Hudson Bay probably, and to like take molds of the native of the local Inuits who were living traditionally on meat, and they came back and they were like perfectly cast, like all of them just perfect, 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 perfect. And he said, and his conclusion was like, this is fully in support of being able to not only survive but thrive on a meat only diet. These people's teeth are perfectly developed, and he was saying that he'd only seen in his entire career had maybe seen 10 perfect teeth, and all of these were perfect, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. So it's it is, it's been in the literature. This has been data that's been collected for hundreds of years, some of it for thousands of years, and yet one group of studies, well positioned and well paid for, all of a sudden just blows that out of the water, and just people just forgot, because they were, it's very easy, it's just indoctrination. You just start with younger generations. This is what it is. This is what it is. This is what it is. And everyone grows. Well, everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. And everyone knew the Earth was flat too. How'd that one work out? So yeah, it's a bit crazy, but no, that's really cool though that you were able to go to Africa. Was that specifically to do with the film, or was that just for your own personal
Oh
research?
no, that was for the film. I brought
Yeah.
over my director, editor. We went with a woman, Mary Ruddick, who's kind of trying to retrace the steps of Weston Price and
Mhm.
kind of blue zones too. She's kind of debunking the blue zones
Good.
along the way. And yeah, yeah, it was all for the film. We got some great footage. Too bad there's so much to cover. It's hard to cover this all. But actually, here's another little quick one that's interesting for the that we're trying to include in the film. The Maasai are known to be super tall, super healthy, right? The same thing, like amazing teeth, just they're like 6'2" on average, just healthiest people alive. They're the ones doing the blood, the milk, the meat. There was a group called the Agikuyu who were near the Maasai, so same environment, but they, for whatever reason, went vegetarian. I don't remember the story. For multiple generations, vegetarian, they were on average like 6 to 8 inches shorter than the Maasai, had worse health.
Mhm.
It's just such a good comparison. There's many of these comparisons actually. Talk about Native American. There's like different groups of people that people looked at, and they lived in the same area, right? You have to look at the same area, and the people who were doing the traditional way of living and were eating, the hunting and gathering, compared to the people that settled down and farmed. Like we saw this in North America. I don't remember what year, but they had the remains of these different populations, completely different health, right? The people that remained hunter gatherers in the same area with the same access to foods, but chose to eat the animal foods instead of just growing grains, completely different health profile, different bone structure, different diseases. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
There was I was watching a talk by Dr. Steve Finney. I don't know if you've come across him. He's
Oh
really
yeah,
good.
for
Yeah.
sure. Finney and Volek are kind of legends.
Yeah, yeah. And he was talking about, I forget the name of the tribe, but it was a Native American tribe. And they had these paintings that were made of them in the 1800s by this very, famous painter at the time. And
Mhm.
he painted them. They were very, very tall, strong, proportioned
Mhm.
people with big heads, big ass brains. And and they were saying that actually these people were like, oh, they were all like 6'7", 6'8", you know. And they were like, well, how can that be? These guys' heads are huge. That guy's 6'7" is going to be like a beach ball,
Mhm.
but that's what it was. And and even they had them come out to meet Thomas Jefferson when he was president. And and Jefferson, who was like 6'2", 6'3",
Mhm.
something like that, said to these guys, like, these guys were tall as
Mhm.
hell, and it's like, this is documented. These guys were massive, massive guys, like, yeah, all like 6'7", 6'8".
Mhm.
And and they were all living traditionally, and just eating meat. I even, you think, well, just genetics, this, that, and the other. Native Americans now, like I don't think the average height of Native Americans is all that high. I don't know if it's
Mhm.
much higher than the average,
Mm.
American. It might even be less. I certainly don't think it's just, a bunch of like,
I think it's
6'7"
less.
I
Yeah.
think it would be too. And and that's something I learned when I was a kid, was that when eating a Western diet, Native Americans were 4 times as likely to get all the diseases like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, etc. I remember thinking at the time, like, well, doesn't that mean the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. And we eat the food and we get the disease, we just get
Mm.
it at a lower rate. And what's a Western diet compared to a non-Western diet? What are they eating that we're not, and vice versa? And the answer was there was just meat. Even in my own genetic line, I'm like 6'3", my brother's 6'4". My younger brother, who was a very picky eater, didn't like eating meat, just liked eating white rice with tempura sauce. Dude's 5'10", you
Mm.
know, like in the same year, uh, like we wrestled growing up, but he was 4 years younger than me. So he came up after. When we were the same age, and you look back, he was always like 50, 60 pounds lighter than me. He would wrestle at like a 50 or 60 pound
Mhm.
lighter weight class than I
Mm.
would. And like I think like in his senior year, he wrestled like 148. Like I was 215, 220,
Wow.
like it was
Wow.
just a very big difference. And our father is 6'4". His brother's 6'5". The other's 6'7".
Mm.
And their dad was like, again, 6'4". And his brothers were like pushing 7 foot. Like these dudes were storks, just big ass white dudes, played basketball. There's 5 brothers. They all played
Mm.
basketball together, and they all like, knew each other and grew up playing basketball together. So
Mhm.
apparently like they just killed it whenever they played together. And also they were just monsters. So that's in my damn genetic line. So I feel that I got severely ripped off by not getting, I mean, we always had meat, but it was always lean, and it was always in the company of carbs and vegetables, and we had to eat our damn vegetables. And so I feel that I got a bit ripped off. I think if like my mom was carnivore during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and I was just eating meat, I'd probably be like another 6 inches taller, 50 pounds heavier, and just be just out there just killing it, on any field.
I think this is such a big story. And I brought it up to you when you came on my show that there's a couple studies about this. They're worldwide studies. There's one that they looked at 105 studies and the correlation of male height. And then they did an updated version. This is Grassberger, I think it's the guy's last name, from Norway, Sweden, somewhere up there. And they have a new one with 152 countries. And they looked at males and females, and the height correlated to health. It was so amazing how height correlates to health, and that height also directly correlated with animal protein. They call it quality protein intake. And it was just so linear. Like you look at these graphs, it's just a straight line up and to the right. It's like
Yeah.
as the animal protein goes up, their height goes up, their health goes up. It's like the most perfect correlation. The R value, it was like
Yeah.
touching the line, right? The line, the average line, the trend line was like the each dot. It was amazing how it just. And then they also did it into a study, or sorry, into a graphic of the world. And you saw this whole world and it was color coded. And as you went away from the equator, the height went up and the amount of animal protein went up. And people know this. You're up like the Vikings. These are the people eating the most meat, tallest people. And then the people around the equator, very short, relying on rice and plants and stuff. And so, yeah, this is what we're discussing last time. Like, why did this happen? Is it like, why is it epigenetic? Can the genetics actually change and just trend people into shorter populations? Or is it just that it's basically just malnutrition that is just causing it? And you said that, yes, people in China, they could have short parents. And then maybe if they're eating enough animal foods and get the right nutrition, that they could all of a sudden pop up to 6'7", 6'2", whatever, even despite having short parents.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, I think given time, you could certainly change, population, well, I mean, look at the pygmies, I mean, but that's something that's going to take tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. It's not going to be 12. It's just
Yeah.
not, that's just not enough time to really do much of anything. If we look at our genetics overall as Homo sapiens, It's not changed too much in the last 300,000 years. There are changes, but it's not that much. And so these things take a long time. I mean, it took 100,000 years for a grizzly bear to become a polar bear. They're not that different. One's got
Mhm.
white fur and it's a little bigger, eats more meat, you know, and probably bigger because of that as well. And then that's really it. 100,000 years it took,
Mhm.
so it's while you're going to have some changes in 12,000 years, like it's not going to be that dramatic, I don't think. And certainly
Mhm.
not in the last two generations, it's not just going to change that fast. And people talk about that with I talked to a couple of vets that I think that this is just what they sort of taught in vet school, and they just haven't really thought about it too much, so we can just forgive them their ignorance. But you know the average life expectancy of dogs has basically halved since the 1970s, when we started incorporating packaged dog foods. And I've spoken to a lot of vets who will say, "Oh, well, that's because of these breeders. They're just these hyper these puppy mills just pulling these things
Mhm.
out." It's like, really? Because I thought golden retrievers were a pure breed already. You know?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, what changed? That how did just breeding a lot of the same genetic stock all of a sudden half their life expectancy, and made it so they got diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. You know,
Mhm.
dogs shouldn't get cancer. Animals in the zoo don't get cancer. Animals in the wild, as far as we know, really don't get cancer. And so, you know, humans getting cancer, dogs and cats getting cancer, that is abnormal. You know, people getting Alzheimer's, that is very abnormal. you
Mhm.
know and so we people like, oh well, maybe when they start displaying signs of senility in the wild, that's when they get picked up. Great. What about the zoo? No one's getting picked off at the zoo.
Yeah.
You don't see like zebras, like just in a state of mental incapacity. um you know what and think about pregnancy. How women get extremely sick, horrible morning sickness, vomiting, swelling. They can have a really hard time. That is the most abnormal thing that I think I've ever seen. Like, where does that exist in the wild? I mean, we've all seen nature videos. We see a pregnant lioness tracking down a pregnant gazelle,
Mhm.
both of them hauling ass and fighting for their
Mhm.
life. Not just walking around. It's like, oh, my ankles are swollen. Murray, slow down. It's just like, no, it's like that is a recipe for death in the wild. It's not going to happen. So why is that? If you're just puking and vomiting and just retching all day for months, you're not going to make it. You are not going to make it. And so, that is a serious, serious flaw. And so I think that is a direct result of eating the wrong thing. And our bodies are going to be much more sensitive to harmful toxins when we're pregnant, because we're like, you're trying to kill this baby, get it out. I mean, that's like alcohol poisoning. Like, no, that's it, we're done, get all this shit out of here, because you're going to die. You're going to kill yourself with this poison. We need to get this poison out of here. And I think that's probably what's going on with morning sickness, is that they'll do that. The only caveat being, some people get meat sensitivities and they hate the smell of meat,
Oh,
things like that. But
that is
that's
weird.
quite rare. And I'm very curious to see what will happen if they just listen to that. Because when you eat too much meat, and I get sick of it, and I physically don't want to eat it. So I think of that as like, okay, I think you're just not hungry and you don't really know what that feels like. And your body's telling you, hey, stop eating. And if you just stopped eating that day, it would probably taste good the next day or the day after. But that's just a theory anyway.
Well, I saw this firsthand in Africa, and Mary, like I said, was with us. She's all into women's health and helps. She's amazing nutrition. Just I think one of the smartest nutrition people, I don't know what it's called, practitioners in the world. She asked all of these ladies everywhere we went. We had the cameras and we had Mary. Do you have problems with pregnancy? Do you have any of the stuff you're talking about? They said no, no. What are you talking about? No. Everything, every group that would, yes, you're 100% right. This is not normal at all. And I've seen it around town as well. I'm in Austin. I have a lot of friends that eat very well. They're eating animal-based diets through their pregnancy. zero problems. They're like absolutely changed. They had a previous pregnancy eating standard American diet. It was a nightmare. New pregnancy, animal-based diet, amazing. This stuff is solid.
Yeah, good. I'm glad that's being borne out. That's certainly what, I see with people that I know doing carnivore pregnancies, which is proof of concept right there. I mean, you cannot grow an entire life without, if you're eating a deficient diet. This is why, vegans and vegetarians miscarriage rate is way higher than the norm, and birth defects and developmental issues are way higher in vegans and vegetarian parents. um, to the point that you hear these very sad stories, personal stories of friends of mine, since the vegans, or like you say, there's been this overwhelming push and surge of veganism and vegetarianism, plant-based eating over the last few years, with the resurgence of this information and knowledge that meat is actually our optimal nutrition source. And I've known a few people that have had pregnancies that did not turn out well. They were trying for years to get pregnant. They finally did. And unfortunately, they had to terminate the pregnancy because on ultrasound, they were like, this baby is really sick. This baby is not developing properly. This baby has a completely misformed heart. And it's not compatible with life, like it'll be in open heart surgery the day it's born. It'll probably die. If it survives, it won't survive for long, and so they terminated this pregnancy that they really, really wanted, had been trying for years to have, which is absolutely heartbreaking. I mean, it's just devastating. And to me, I'm like, the answer is just staring everyone in the face. But to them, they don't know what's happening, because it's just like, well, obviously I'm eating right, I'm healthy, I'm doing all these sorts of things, and they couldn't be further from the truth. It's very, very sad to see.
Yeah, that's, I think, oh man, it's so sad that that's what it's come to, is that I kind of mentioned this earlier. People give up on diets in general. People say the fat acceptance movement that I'm just doomed to be fat. All this stuff you're talking about is because we have our nutrition so wrong that of course you're going to give up and throw your hands in the air if you're doing supposedly all the right things and you're still sick, you still have excess fat, you still can't be pregnant. It's so sad. It's so sad. And the only way to do it, to fight it, is to make a film. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what else to do. Make a 6-part series. Like, you got to like change the opinions of the world, because it's just getting worse the way we're going.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree with you. I was thinking this as well, a few years ago. I was like, this is something that, needs to be done, needs to be made, especially when the stupid ass things like What the Health were coming out, that hit job. I was looking at that, and I was just like, no, we need something on our side that actually paints a picture, because they are very, very, very convincing. You get something in a documentary form, people think documentary science, documentary something foundational, information, because that's what nerds watch documentaries, and documentaries are so educational, and this and maybe some of them are pure propaganda. And but they carry a lot of weight. And so I think that getting on a major platform is very important. Have you been negotiating with different platforms on where this is going to go?
Well, we're not there yet. We have 2 distribution companies that are wanting to represent us, that get things on Netflix all the time. So yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I'm not worried about that. We're just need to make the best film possible. And if anyone watches the intro on my Food Lies YouTube channel, they'll know that it is the highest quality possible. Then someone's going to take it. I think there's going to be a bidding war.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't doubt that, because I think this is a very unique film, of its own. And like, there've been other ones, you mentioned Sacred Cow. I really liked Fata documentary by Vinnie Tortorich.
Mhm.
You know, he had people like Gary Taub and Nina
Mhm.
Schultz, and you know, I thought that did a great job as well. And he did two of those, and then you know, Beyond Impossible, which just shows the corruption in the food industry and the, you know, the big push for this chemical slop and how this is really not a good idea. And I think that um, has probably helped the discussion immensely because you know, people are, you know, seeing through the bullshit of the Impossible Burger and all that sort of stuff, and you know, the stocks are dropping off and everything like that, which is
Yeah.
just great to see. You know, you knew it was going to happen.
Oh
I knew
yeah.
anyway, but like it was, you know, it's always nice to see that come true. It's always nice to be right. I don't know.
Exactly.
I still am not tired of that.
Yeah. Well, people know, people are smart. People know nutrition inherently. They know that it's bad. I loved all this stuff like during COVID, and there was all the meat was gone and the impossible stuff stayed. Like all the fake meat was still
Mm,
in the store. I love
yeah,
those memes. It made me so happy because like
yeah,
people know they're desperate for food. They're still not buying that trash. I
I'm
took
that
pictures of
desperate.
my own. I went around, dude. I was at Costco. There was mountains of that stuff left and everything else was gone. Like it was crazy.
That's funny. Yeah, I think Costco was the only store capable of not getting like bought out of toilet paper during all that that crisis when, when people were just going nuts on that. There's you keep hearing these stories about when things open back up. There's like there's like people that are trying to like return like hundreds of packages of toilet paper
Oh, really?
to the store. They're like, yeah, I want to return all this. They're like, absolutely not. Like, get out of here. You're like, you're
That's
the
funny.
idiot who like screwed it up for everyone else. You know, now you just got to live with it. Toilet
Yeah.
paper for the rest of your life, for the next 3 generations. You know, I mean, like, I don't think, I think like, you know, one thing of Costco, you know, will last the person like 2 years or something
Oh,
like
yeah, it
that.
should.
Yeah. And, yeah, but, yeah, I think they even had like a limit when they, here in Perth, they opened up Costco like right at the height of all that craziness.
Mhm,
And so they had like just the normal Costco like 48 roll thing.
mhm,
And then, you know, limited, you know, one, they actually like said, like, no, you can't
mhm.
take more than that, but you didn't need more than that. I mean, that was like, that filled up your damn shopping cart, you
Yeah.
know? And so it
Mhm.
would have been just a bit insane if someone was doing more than that. I don't know, like, how often these people shit? Like, I mean, seriously, like how much toilet paper do you actually need? You
I
know?
think if you're on this like standard American plant, focused diet and grains, I think you got problems, man.
Yeah. Yeah. He was going 6 times a day. I played rugby with a guy who was talking about how I was like, oh yeah, no, it's healthier. The more you go, the healthier it is. Like, I take a dump like 6 times a day. I was like, 6 times a day. Like, how do you have time to do anything else? You know, you're just crapping and wiping and cleaning yourself all the time. Like,
Ooh.
Jesus, that sounds awful. You know, like I was very meat based. I really didn't eat much else, even when I wasn't thinking in this way. And I